Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Hello. Well, as you've heard, my name is Stephen Franks. I'm from Action for Blind People. Can everyone hear me, first of all? That's probably the most important thing to start with. This, as Jill said, is a very general presentation. There are a number of specialist services that we have within my team and within Action for Blind People. There are a number of different people who could have come today, but they may have been very good on their specialist subject and not very good at some of the other aspects of the presentation. So we thought, Jill and I discussed this, and we thought that maybe I should come today, but I'm not a specialist. I'm a manager of specialists, if you like. So, as Jill says, if there's issues that come out today and that people are particularly interested in, maybe we can get someone to come back another day to talk in depth about some of the areas that I'm going to cover. But I'm also going to call on maybe colleagues to help answer some of the questions if there is some questions later on. I will talk a little bit about what we do. That comes a bit later on. And I've just got a very brief overview of the kind of products that are available. But before I do that, it's just a kind of general introduction to who we are as an organisation and just some statistical information about blind people and common eye conditions. So the first thing, and it's often one of the first questions that anyone ever asks me, wherever we are you the RNIB? And as you see on our logo, it says Action for Blind People, part of our RNIB group. So people often ask me, what does this mean? So Action's been around for about 157 years. It's been around a long time, but not high-profile organisation, I would say. And that's partly because Action's always been a services organisation. We're always at front line dealing with blind and partially sighted people directly. Not so strong on the kind of branding side and the campaigning and the fundraising. RNIB, on the other hand, most people will know RNIB. Also, they're very well known in the fundraising sector and the campaigning sector. But what was happening, increasingly so, that RNIB were running a few services and we were running a few services and we were trying to raise money and so were they. And we were just kind of competing for no reason for ever-dwindling pots of money. So 5 years ago, we created the RNIB group. And what this meant was we kind of shuffled the staff around between the two organisations. RNIB is the main lead on fundraising. So when you're giving money to the RNIB, whether it's in a little collecting tin or wherever else it is, you're giving money to the RNIB group, of which one of the partners is Action for Blind People. They also lead in all the campaigning, so anything to do with influencing government, about policies, to do with pedestrian access, things like that, that's RNIB. They still have a national information line, which is the first point of contact for inquiries by the phone and email. They still run a membership service, and they still run direct frontline services in the devolved country, so that's Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. What does that leave for Action? So Action does the frontline services in England. So apart from the information helpline that RNIB runs and a legal helpline, we do all the frontline services, the face-to-face work. And I manage the London team. We do have teams across the country. So we are still two separate organisations, but we work towards the same objectives. And we talk to RNIB and make sure that we're doing the work that goes towards the same aims and objectives, so there's not so much overlap. And that's why it's called the RNIB group. But as I say, we're still separate organisations. So I've got some information about vision impairment in the UK. Some of this may be familiar to you. So there are around 360,000 people registered as blind and partially sighted. I will touch a little bit more about that in a moment, about getting registered. And this is common with lots of different conditions, that doesn't capture everyone. Almost 2 million people living with sight loss, it's an estimate. Why do people not get registered? Number of reasons. People may not recognise that they're having a sight loss issue. They may not be going to get their eyes tested. They may have got their eyes tested but don't want to deal with the issue and don't want to kind of confront it and see someone about it. Some people just put it down to age-related and say, well, it's just something that I'm going through. Some people do not want to be labelled. So like a lot of different conditions, a lot of people won't seek any further support or advice around their eyes and therefore don't get registered. But the general theory is that 100 people in the UK start to lose their sight every day. And the reason why we always encourage people to think about getting their eyes tested and seeking support is about 50% of those cases will be avoidable. I've mentioned two particular issues here. There are a number of different issues, clearly, but one of the ones I thought was worth mentioning because it relates to something else I'm going to say is about depression. It's really through isolation. Older people with sight loss are almost 3 times as likely to suffer depression. Sight loss, as you can imagine, is a very isolating experience. As it gets worse and people don't want to go out, particularly in the winter, where a lot of our clients will say, well, I don't want to go out after lunchtime because by the time I get somewhere and I need to go home, it's going to be too dark. I'm not going to find my way. Very isolating to be left in that situation. So emotional well-being is quite a key area. And then I've also put about 1/3 of registered blind and partially sighted people of working age are in employment. That's a low figure compared to the general population. I think it's about 2/3 of the general population. So we do get a lot of people who are isolated, maybe not contacting us in the first place, and when they do, there are issues around going to work, and that relates to some of the services we have. Now, I'm not a specialist in eye conditions. There are a number of eye conditions. The next slide is just some of the most common ones, but as I say, it won't cover everything. Some of these you would have heard of course. Diabetic retinopathy, caused through diabetes, can have different effects, but the main effect we're talking about here is a kind of patchy vision. So there are spots of which you cannot see clearly. Macular degeneration tends to affect central vision, so you can't see the detail in the centre, and you might lose a bit of central vision, but you've still got your surrounding vision. Gets quite difficult in terms of getting around and doing detailed work, but again there are equipment and solutions around that. One of them is about using the retained sight that you have at the side of your eyes, so it may be about reading, being trained to read by using a page at the side of your eye and passing it across your eye like that. Glaucoma is the opposite. Glaucoma is where you have the central vision, so you can see detail, but you haven't got the periphery. Tends to affect older people in particular. So again, there are different techniques and there are ways of dealing with that condition if it's getting worse. And cataracts, most of you have heard of cataracts, where the lens is clouded up, so everything becomes foggy. That one can be rectified through replacing the lens. Retinitis pigmentosa is one of a number of conditions where it's affected by light sensitivity. Particularly, it might be sensitive to strong light, which means going out in the summer can be a problem if it's too bright. It can be a problem in the winter when there's snow, and people say the same thing, too much reflected light off the snow. Difficult to see the curbs, difficult to see road markings and railings and things like that. As I say, this is not an exhaustive list, it's just to give you an idea of some of the most common conditions and some of the ones that we come across quite a lot. Now, I mentioned about getting registered as either sight impaired or severely sight impaired. Normally for us, what we would advise people is we're saying you need to get, there's a 2-stage process. You get certified by an ophthalmologist, though I believe by talking to people just before this presentation, it would be through a specialist, wouldn't it, for yourselves? But the process is to get certified by an ophthalmologist who then will contact social services. The certificate, if you're eligible, gets sent to them. They will then pick up the case from there and start thinking about what cases, what things are needed in terms of support. Some of the benefits, there are more than these, some of the benefits to getting registered as sight impaired are a tax allowance. There is a reduction in the TV licence fee of 50%. Articles for the blind labels, does everyone know about those? No? They are sort of free post labels. You can get them from the RNIB. So for sending documents, especially if you use larger font, and it's the eligibility criteria is size 16 and above, particularly for those who use Braille. I mean, a small leaflet can suddenly turn out to be a rather large chunk of paper, which obviously increase postal costs. So articles for the blind labels are for things of 16 size font and above, or Braille, to send through the post for free. And that also includes things like audio. So if someone asks us for audio, we need to post something out on CDs, we can do it through articles for the blind. Disabled Persons Rail Card, which entitles to 1/3 off national rail travel. And the Freedom Pass, this is in London, where it gives you free travel on buses and local trains, not the national rail, but the local overground trains. And underground, thank you. There are some other schemes that you may or may not be aware of in terms of accessible transport. Again, if you're registered as sight impaired, there's the taxi card scheme. Can vary. The general rule of thumb is the charge is within London £2.50, but then they'll charge you a bit extra depending on how far you're going. There's also the blue badge. That's not just for those who drive, because obviously a lot of our service users come to us that don't drive at all, but it's also for those who drive other people. And that obviously gives you entitlement to various key parking spaces, certainly closer to the entrances of supermarkets. That comes again, there is with the registration, there is an inquiry line there I put up on the screen, but again, that actually comes through going through social services, asking them getting registered first before you can get entitled to that. National Rail Assistance and the Tfl Travel Mentoring. I don't actually know many people who've used this, but these are systems for getting assistance when getting on trains being met by a member of staff. So, for example, with TfL, if you ring them in advance, you tell them the kind of journey you're making, they'll meet you at the station, they'll radio ahead to the station that you're going to get off so that they can get a staff member down on the platform and meet you when you get off your train to take you out of the station again. Some of the staff at some of the stations are amazing. At King's Cross, probably because they take a lot of people to the RNOB, will often bring people from the station right up to our front door, which is, about 5-10 minute walk. So that's really, really going out of their way. I don't think they would do that everywhere. But the two numbers there are for getting that kind of assistance on National Rail and on TfL. So, finally getting around to what we do. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have a number of specialist services. So one of the key ones is independent living. It kind of is a bit of a catch-all. So people do come to us who have never heard of any of the support available. They may have not got registered yet and simply want to know, how do I get registered? Where do I go? What do I do? Even those who are registered, though, often come to us later on, and this happens very regularly with us. They come to us and we tell them about the services and the entitlements that they can get. And they said, no one told me at the time I was registered. It seems unusual because when you're registered, you do go through social services. But sometimes they're maybe not going a direct route. Now, the example I can give you is from the hospitals. A lot of people who are diagnosed with condition, obviously they're dealing with someone who's dealing on the medical side of things. So they're looking at medical solutions, surgery, treatment. It might be that they've been told there's no further treatment, there's no further surgery we can do to correct your vision or to save the vision you've got. And I think that probably that message kind of then sinks in and overrides everything else. And what they forget to say is, but by the way, before you go, there's a number of other services that are out there. And we do have, sometimes we have some people based in hospitals to capture people at that moment. As soon as they've been diagnosed, to say to them, right, okay, bad news, but there are other services out there, there are other entitlements for you, and start signposting them. But so many people do not get that information. We don't have people in all hospitals, clearly, and people who come to our services often say, I wish I'd known about this 2 years, 5 years ago. The kind of things they do come to us then, apart from how do I get registered, what am I entitled to, following on from that, benefits applications. We do get a lot of these. I'm not a specialist in this area, but I did ask my colleague before I came out how your condition would affect this, because you may not get registered as sight impaired. That doesn't matter to us. To Action for Blind People doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter to benefits. So you can still claim disability living allowance, you could still claim attendance allowance. We help with people with the application process. Some of that is just physical, some of that's just about the form, and actually just filling it in and getting the information down on the form. Some of it's about us strengthening the case and advocating on behalf of those who are applying. Naturally, a lot of people, when it comes to answering questions, very personal questions and benefit applications about can you dress yourself, can you get to the bathroom in the morning, and people clearly will want to be as independent as possible and say, yes, of course I can manage. In our experience, that we try and encourage people to, in that process only, to just lay it on a little bit thicker, because the more you say, well, I can manage, the less likely successfully your application will be. So we do gently encourage people to say, look, we're not saying you can't do it, and actually you may not need that much support, but in the application you need to be quite convincing. I can't do this without support. That money ultimately is going to pay for maybe some support worker who can help you do some of the things that you're putting in your application. So benefit applications is quite a key area of work that we do. We also do appeals. So sometimes someone's applied for current DLA, and they may have only got the lower rate care component and want to achieve a higher rate. That's something we can do through an appeal. Of course, as you know, benefits are changing a lot at the moment, so at some point it's going to get into personal dependent payments and universal credit, so we're helping people to start thinking about those applications as well now. We also run, under independent living, we run a course called Living with Sight Loss. It's something we've only just started this year. It's partly aimed at those who recently registered as sight impaired, but it doesn't have to be, and they don't have to be registered at all. Or they may have had a condition for a number of years and have had a change in their condition. And this course covers a number of different subjects. I kind of almost would subtitle it as everything you ever wanted to know about visual impairment, because it takes a view from the start that we're going to cover every single topic, and each week there's a different topic. So one week we'll talk about benefits and entitlements. The next week we'll talk about eye health and nutrition and keeping your eyes healthy. We have a week, one session devoted to emotional well-being, led by a counsellor. We have a week on technology. You get the idea. So it covers a number of different subjects. And underlying all of that, it's a chance for blind people to meet other blind people and share experiences. And what we find time and time again, it's not really about us and about the information that we're giving. It's about them meeting each other. I've seen this on a number of occasions on this course now, where people have come in at the beginning of the course and have started talking about their experiences as if they're the only person in the world who's experienced it. And the rest of the group start saying, well, of course, I've experienced that, and this is what I did. The palpable look of comfort and relief on their faces when they realise they're with other people in the same situation is one of the aspects of this. And the other part of it is learning from others. So where one person says, I'm still having trouble getting on the bus, and I'm getting off the bus, I can't hear the announcements, what do I do? Someone invariably in the group will say, I used to have that problem, and now I tap the driver on the shoulder and tell him that the announcement's been switched off. They've got, or count the stops, or whatever it might be. They swap advice. And what we're finding, and I mentioned isolation right at the beginning, is that people are keeping in contact after the course, and that's beyond us. So we run those courses throughout the year in different locations across London at the moment and other parts of the country, a Living with Sight Loss course. And as I said, it's a new thing we've been doing, but we're finding people's feedback is saying things again like, I wish I'd had this information 5 years ago, which is quite sad to think that they've been having the condition without that information for them. So I mentioned at the beginning about isolation, and I mentioned also about employment. I particularly mentioned, obviously, people of working age. We do run employment services, very similar to other services and other charities. So we're helping with application forms, CVs, interview preparation, and probably most important of all, talking to employers about what they need to do, because employers invariably will not know what to do, will panic, and will think, oh, we can't take this person on, they can't see how they're going to operate the computer. So we do a lot of advice around employers, visual awareness training, and showing them equipment. And that comes into the next section, which is access technology. I'm talking here mostly about IT, so it's softwares for computers. I don't know if you've ever seen them, the magnification softwares and the speech softwares. If you've not seen these, we do demonstrate them at the Resource Centre, which is at the RNIB's main building. It's very confusing because my team's based in the RNIB's building. As I said, we're part of the RNIB group. So when you go into the RNIB's main building in Judd Street near King's Cross, as you walk into reception, you'll notice on the right, if you've seen it before, there's a Resource Centre. It's like a huge shop, and it's Action for Blind People. Bit confusing, but that's our Resource Centre in their offices there. It's open Monday to Friday. You can just wander in. You don't have to buy anything. There's no pressure to do anything like that. You can just have a look at the products, ask the staff for some demonstrations. If you're interested in the softwares, they will show you the softwares there and then. And that's the kind of work that we do with employers, telling people about what's available, how people can use these softwares in the workplace, and about magnification, which I'll show you a slide of in a minute. Last element of our work I'll mention, we do more than just these 4 areas, but we do a little bit of work with children and young people. We have what's called Actionaires clubs. You may have heard of them. They meet at the weekends, they do different sports activities. We are now trying to build it up into a bit more than that. We're trying to make it more of leisure as well as sports, to build up general confidence. And then we do work with young adults in residential courses and weekends, where we not only do sports and leisure, but we start talking to them about what are their aims, what are they thinking of doing, what's their career aspirations, how are they thinking of integrating socially, what hobbies are they going to take up, and encouraging their confidence and independence. As I said, we do more than that. Action's got some hotels, we've got some supported housing units in London as well. Everything that we do is on our website, but these are some of the core elements of work that we do. And as I say, if there's something in particular that is of interest here, we can bring someone in to talk about one of these things here. For example, someone could come in and actually demonstrate some of the access technology, which is always a very interesting and hands-on approach to doing things. If you were interested in benefits, someone can come and talk about the benefits in more detail. I thought I'd mention one other telephone support that RNIB still provide. It's not through Action, it's through RNIB. I mentioned the helpline. It's still a national helpline. They deal with just general inquiries, so you may not have a very involved issue. You just want some general information, what's happening about the benefits at the moment. I need to ask a little question about access to work, or if you're in work, those kind of issues. The helpline can deal with those, and they refer on to Action if you need more detailed help. So that email is the main contact point for Action for Blind People as well. And I've mentioned also their counselling service on this page. They have a telephone counselling service, again, emotional support being one of the key areas for us, people coming to us who may be in denial, may be going through a kind of bereavement process over losing their sight. RNIB still do this via the telephone. We do still do some face-to-face counselling, but I haven't put it on the slide because it's funded by the Department of Health, and our funding for that project discontinues in March next year, so we're not sure at this stage whether that's going to continue, but the RNIB's telephone counselling will continue. I just sort of put a few slides up. If you haven't been to Resource Centre, just to give you a flavour of the kind of things that are available, it just starts sparking some thoughts. The first picture on the left is a keyboard, a computer keyboard with large character keys. So it's a standard size keyboard, but the actual buttons on the keyboard are slightly larger, but the characters on the keys themselves are much larger. In this case, they're black on yellow, but you can get different variants of this. Lots of different types of keyboards, coloured plastic keyboards, so you've got different colours for different buttons, things like that. You can see a lot of those in the Resource Centre. And next to that, I've got a magnifier, a portable magnifier. Now, there's 2 types of magnifiers. There's the ordinary handheld ones that are effectively magnifying glasses, which are used for people with low vision. But the electronic ones are much more powerful. They can increase the size of the screen hugely, and then they can take a snapshot, and they can also invert the contrast again. So if you don't like the conventional black and white, you can change it to yellow on blue or red on black, etc., which you can't do with the normal handheld ones. In the Resource Centre, you'll see a number of different varieties of these handheld ones, and also desk CCTVs as well. Rather cumbersome, a bit bigger, but they're good for reading large articles such as newspapers and magazines, things like that. Has anyone seen one of these? It's a Braille Display. It's something I hadn't come across myself before I worked at Action, and the only reason I did come across it is because our administrator in our team is blind and she reads Braille. There are not that many people who read Braille. I think it's about 4% of the population. So I have an administrator who uses both speech software on her computer, so she uses headphones to listen to what the computer's reading out from the screen, and at the same time she uses this Braille display. You can see it's about the length, it's roughly about the length of a keyboard, so it sits where the keyboard would conventionally sit, and the picture on the right shows you a bit of a close-up. There's a number of holes with pins that formulate words in Braille, depending what's on the screen. So it reads one line at a time, and it will move those different spokes up and down, as you can see there's someone actually using their finger to read it, and will formulate the letters of Braille so that she can read what's on the screen. It's quite an incredible piece of kit. There's something very similar called a Braille note, where you can actually type in to another device, which will then reproduce it in Braille. There are also Braille printers as well. This is actually my last slide. Just, again, a flavour of the kind of things at the Resource Centre. A lot of the things in the Resource Centre are not just for employment, they're for just daily living, and these are just some examples. Some of the things you'll find in there will benefit other people who haven't got a sight loss, but just actually like the idea of having a talking clock or a talking watch or a big button phone. But some of these are particularly useful for our clients, and I just thought I'd put them down. The one in the top left corner is a cup of tea. It's got a device that's sitting in it. It's a liquid level indicator. It sits on the side of the mug. You fill it up with hot water, and as the water hits the rods that are inside there on the little unit, it starts to rattle and vibrate to tell you to stop pouring, rather than having to put your finger in the cup, as a lot of people do, to see where the level's got to. Next to that on the right is a talking thermometer. There's lots of talking devices, talking clocks and things like that. I thought this one was quite unusual. And there is something called a pen friend. I don't know if any of you have seen that, and that's worth seeing if you ever go to the Resource Centre, where you record your own voice into the device. It looks a bit like the thermometer. And you then use a sticker and you mark items. So you mark tins of food. And when you tap the pen against the food, it will read back what you recorded. So if it's a tin of soup and you say tomato soup, and you tap the sticker with the pen, it remembers it. And next time you tap the sticker, it will just speak back to you, tomato soup. Tons of devices in there. As I say, it is worth a visit. Bottom left-hand corner, I don't know if you've seen these, there's two elements there. There's a signature guide, there's a piece of plastic with a slot that's missing. That's to put on a form where your signature has to go in a particular box, and it mustn't overlap the outside of the box, whether it's a passport application, something like that, or a cheque where you need to put your signature on a particular line of the cheque. You put the card, someone has to guide it for you, obviously, puts the card on the space where you want, and then you just sign within the blank space on the card so that you can actually put your signature in the right space. And below that is a banknote guide. Each of the banknotes, as you know, are a different width, and you measure them against the little plastic device there, and depending on the width, it will tell you which banknote it is. And on the last picture, bottom right-hand corner, there's a number of leisure-related equipment in the Resource Centre. So there's talking books, there's large print books, Braille books, and then there's a lot of toys and games, really. And when I say games, things like Scrabble, tactile Scrabble, which has got sort of raised features, and the little tiles for the Scrabble have got Braille on them. I just put these playing cards up as an idea. These are large print playing cards. They've also got Braille on them. So again, there's a number of different items in there, and it is just worth kind of browsing and having a look. As always with equipment, new things are coming out all the time, so it's always worth, even if you have been, but you haven't been maybe for a year, maybe 18 months, it's probably worth revisiting, and you might be surprised what's new. In fact, if you even just go in and just say, can you show me what's new? I think the pen friend that I mentioned has only been around for about 18 months, so that gives you an idea. Things are coming on the market constantly. They're always improving and upgrading the different types of equipment. Now, I'll tell you something I did forget to put on here, which is kind of odd, is my own contact details. I can always provide that to you, Jill, and maybe, if needed, then this presentation can be circulated around. Obviously, I've got the helpline number and the details up there, so people can always contact us for more information. But I hope that's given you just kind of an overview. I'd say it's very general, giving you an overview, maybe giving you some thoughts to say if there are subjects you want to revisit, we can bring some people back. I will try to answer some of your questions. As I say, I have more of a general view on things, but we'll try to do that. So I'll hand over and see if there's any questions. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to say a really big thank you to Stephen. I think he, and to a lesser extent we, were slightly anxious about this talk, because obviously we recognise there are a lot of very significant differences between vision loss because your eyes aren't working properly, as opposed to vision loss, people here experience it because your brain isn't working as well as it used to. But I feel really excited and encouraged by this for lots of reasons. One is that, as we've heard so many times at this meeting, that particularly in the early stages when sight loss is beginning to occur, vision problems are beginning to occur, lots and lots of people from this group have found themselves with the eye specialists rather than the brain specialists. And so increasing the links between services for people with PCA and services for people, with eyesight loss are really important, so that the people you first meet know about both possibilities and can discriminate the things which sound more like an eye problem or more like a brain problem. And that's going to be a particular drive of this group, to make PCA better known to ophthalmologists, optometrists, opticians, etc. in the coming months and years. Another thing for me is also we've talked again about the sort of gadgets that are available, and whilst there are some things there which are suitable for people with PCA and some things which we've experienced before are more difficult or aren't so helpful, I find it really exciting to think that how much effort has gone into developing new technologies to assist people with eyesight loss, and feel encouraged that as we get the message of PCA out. Okay, so the question was about services for people who perhaps English isn't their first language. So you maybe
in terms of action, first of all, obviously some of our projects like employment, you need to be resident in the UK and eligible to work, and the same with the benefits, of course. So for us, the language isn't an issue. We can book interpreters and use interpreters to actually give our advice, as long as they're eligible for the services that we're advising on. In terms of talking newspapers, it's not something I actually would know whether they would do them in other languages. I would guess it would have to be a request to a specific talking newspaper to say would they provide it in a different language. Is that what you meant when you said, I think that sort of thing, and general information? I mean, it's yeah. I mean, it's all I can say is from the perspective of an organisation like ours, where normally the issue is about the visual impairment rather than the language. It's the visual impairment that we're focusing on, and then, as I say, if we need to, we'll book an interpreter. I would have thought that in the case of a talking newspaper, yeah, it's more of a language issue than a sight issue in that particular case, isn't it? It's actually, it may not even be the talking newspaper that's needed. It might be a different form of communication entirely. I don't know whether it's a Portuguese newsletter association or a Portuguese association, something like that. That might be more relevant in this particular case. No. We don't provide talking newspapers ourselves, not from Action for Blind people. That's a separate entity. But as I said, we do provide our services to people whose English is not our first language.
So the suggestion there was that the embassy or cultural organisations might be able to provide that sort of support. Graham, I think you had a question.
Not really a question, just a couple of comments. Firstly, my wife and I visited the resource centre a couple of months ago, and the staff were extraordinarily helpful, and just like to pass on our thanks for that. And also to endorse what you said about a pen friend. We got one of those a couple of months ago, and we've been using it, and it is an extremely helpful bit of kit. Thanks for that as well.
I think people probably heard most of that, but it was just thanking the staff in the equipment office for being so helpful and the use of this pen friend gadget.
It's quite a hard product to describe, actually, isn't it? It's something that needs to be demonstrated and described.
Jolly to have a bit of kit.
Good to have a bit of kit, yes. Thank you.
Linda and then Jack.
Very quick question first. Are these all available on your website?
Yes, there is a shop. It's actually the resource centre. When you go into the shop itself at Judge Street, you buy from there as well.
Yes.
If you're doing it online, it's through the RNIB's website. They have a shop and they sell some of these items as well.
One more. What are the chances of Braille being taught compulsorily in UK schools? Or just being offered?
So the question, just a nice easy one to throw in there. What are the chances of Braille being taught compulsorily in UK schools?
Not something I'm aware of. It's not a subject I'm sort of aware of. I know we get a lot of people asking us for Braille. I know that finding Braille teachers isn't easy. our administrator, as I said, who uses Braille, often just does it herself, just as a favour to people who come to us. But the RNIB helpline might know of places where you can learn Braille. But as for campaigning to get it onto a kind of national curriculum or anything like that, I don't think that's one of the RNIB campaigns. However, RNIB group, Action for Blind People, always very keen to hear people's opinions about things, and very much prides itself on not being user-led, but being influenced very heavily by blind and partially sighted people with sight conditions, and where there is enough body of opinion, they then adopt it as a campaign. So a good example will be, I think Guide Dogs started the Safer Streets campaign, where they levered off all the pavements and the curbs in Kensington. That was a Guide Dogs campaign, but Action and RME then got involved with that because they realised that a lot of people were coming to us also complaining about transport and these sort of streets issue. So it's always worth bringing the RME, because the more people kind of start saying these kind of questions, if there's a number of people, someone in RME is going to go, right, we need to start a campaign around this, because there's obviously a body of opinion here that needs this. But RME helpline for the initial question.
Jeff and then Carol.
Not really a question, but picking up on attendance accounts. I first came from Susan, one over the half. Was turned down. Then the field had letters from Jill, Dr. Shott, explaining exactly what PCA was. Here's an illness, and there's certain things that Susan can't do. She needs help with. And on the field, we've got full attendance now. So I would encourage people here to apply for it, and not give up on the first attempt. So I think the people that are involved have never heard of this.
Yeah.
We've got doctors that have heard of it. There might be the government centre.
The gentleman was just saying that original application on behalf of your wife for attendance allowance was turned down, with support from here that you got the higher rates for full attendance allowance. Did my point from earlier kind of make sense to you about laying it on a bit? Yeah, okay.
But that mentioned previous PCA carers.
Yeah.
You have to look at the worst.
You have to look at the worst case. And we did the same thing applies to those who go to work. There's an access to work scheme where you get equipment in the workplace, and again, same principle applies. People will say, well, I can manage with this, and then they don't get any support. And again, they come to us and we say, right, you've really got to make it the worst case scenario, as you say. It's not a nice thing to ask someone to do, because it kind of goes into quite a lot of emotional issues around that.
Yeah.
And it also makes people feel very disempowered. But just for that one-off process, for those kind of things, you just need to lay it on a bit. So that's a good story to hear. Thank you.
PCA is not recognised nationally, really. So a lot of doctors have never heard of it, even the government centres.
Yeah, just saying that not people many have heard it. We hadn't heard of it. But that's why I had to ask one of my colleagues before I came out who deals with benefits. And I said, if one of you came to us, you weren't registered, and maybe it was not being recognised, and even if it's not anything to do with the eyes, would we still help? And he said yes, and you'd still be eligible to get those benefits. So yeah, thank you.
Well, if you go to your local council carers, they usually come down and assess you, and will tell you what you're allowed to claim, and the department that deals with in our particular case, it's called the sensory services team, and they do everything. So they look at the taxi card and all the other things.
We've certainly heard, and I think a number of the support group members have been really helped by their local sensory team,
yes,
making them aware of services, coming around and looking at their home, improving lighting levels and that sort of thing, which don't cure the PCA but help you cope with the consequences of it. Yeah.
The sensory teams, two things. One is I don't think they'll necessarily help with the form filling. They might do. Some of them do. It depends who you get, and some of them won't. And then the other thing is that a lot of people come to us who've never been to the sensory team. They don't even know the sensory team exists.
No.
So the sensory teams are actually vital.
I owned the carers department in my council, and they sent a couple of people down and filled me in completely with what we would claim and that sort of thing.
That's really good. You had a positive experience of them. Other questions, Mandy?
Question.
So would someone with PCA be eligible for a guide dog?
Good question. I don't know is the answer, but I'm thinking if my colleagues in the office thought that our services would be available to you, I don't know actually. Anyone have any knowledge about that one? I don't myself, but I would have thought there would be a reason to say that you would be eligible. I just would think. I won't know exactly. I'm trying to think now. It's been, as I say, we've got 2 guide dog users in the office. About a month. Yeah, not much longer. Would you like me to find out? Or okay. Sorry, I don't know the answer to that one. But as I say, I would have thought that the end result is that you still can't find your way around because you can't perceptibly see. Then surely the guide dog would be an answer to that one. There are eye conditions, aren't there, where, again, there's nothing wrong with the eyes, but the eyes can't open. So again, if your eyes were tested, they would be considered fine, but the muscles around the eyes don't work, and therefore they can't actually open their eyes. And I think they get guide dogs. So it would seem to me the same principle, really. Sorry, I can't answer that.
I think one of the other things I'm encouraged by is that there's a relatively rare condition like PCA where we don't know exactly how many people there are in the country who have PCA, but we would guess it's in the numbers of high hundreds or low thousands. But to hear of services which are available to a much larger body of people, so you quoted 360,000 people with significant sight loss, also gives hope that perhaps where appropriate, without wanting to take advantage, if we can direct people towards the sorts of services that you're offering, it would really help with, to complement the limited services that there are for people with PCA. So, if any other questions before we thank Steve? Yes, sorry. So the question was, is there something like or other than a white stick to indicate that someone has visual problems?
The first thing to say is there's more than just the white canes. There's different coloured canes. Some people just don't like the white cane. There are different coloured ones. You can decorate them in any way you like. But of course, the white cane's universally recognised. Funny enough, I was discussing this actual subject the other day with a group of blind people. And they were saying that the trouble is that even a walking stick, just a normal average walking stick which is white, doesn't get seen as someone who's visually impaired because they just see it as a walking stick. So there's some disadvantages by veering off away from that. Also there's the symbol cane. The symbol cane, which is quite a short cane, which you can follow in, take it around with you just as a symbol to say I'm visually impaired. I've not seen anyone kind of wearing a badge or anything like that. We did in this discussion the other day, again, someone was saying, well, I'd rather not have a cane, I'd rather wear a high visibility jacket. But I mean, that doesn't seem to me to solve the solution there, because lots of people wear high visibility jackets, as security men, workers in the street. That doesn't seem to help. And also a badge, I would have thought, it's good for close-up, of course, not so great if you're walking down the street. I'm trying to think if we've had... I'm not in my experience in this organisation. I've been with Action for Blind People for 6 years. I certainly know in my last organisation, which was the Royal National Institute for Deaf People, we used to have the same kind of discussion about badges, and there were a couple of organisations that made them, but ultimately we used to say to people, if you really feel about it, make one, just make one yourself, because a lot of people didn't like having a label going deaf, blind or whatever pinned on them. Clearly, that didn't suit everyone. Some people wanted it, that's fine. So there are some organisations that made badges for deaf people. I don't know if there is for blind. I've never seen anyone with such a label, such a badge. But
sorry, it's just one other question.
Well, there might be someone that's seen one.
Oh, sorry, yeah, it's about the same topic. I think our impression from what people have told us is that I know, for example, at least one person sitting in front of me who came with a cane today and has found, I know from previous conversations, has found it very helpful. I know someone else who's gone for the fluorescent jacket option, and I think the armband. So I think it is, like Stephen was saying, about choosing what's appropriate for you, but often some sort of visible marker is very helpful.
The symbol cane, a lot of people just hang it around their wrist. They don't even hold it. They just have it hanging from the wrist as a sign.
I always carry mine.
You always carry yours.
I've carried mine ever since I was diagnosed. Yes, and it was with Seth, sorry. And I think Seth suggested it. George suggested it.
So we've recommended them to a few people, but I think you're the most regular user, which
And
we're delighted it's so effective. No, exactly.
If you're walking with a friend, which I do a lot, it doesn't cause it doesn't cause problems. It creates problems because they can see that it's a man walking with another man, but one's got a white cane. And if I was not walking like that, they would think,
yeah, so it's helpful in a number of situations to be marked out.
Exactly.
Carol, I know you're standing because you're in discomfort. Did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Sorry, yes. I know you said there's lots of help out there. But where do I go? I mean, I can't phone up if you give me a number. I can't see the number. I can't see the dial. What do I do? Where do I go? Where do I get the help?
It's very difficult. I know I'm in the same position.
One of the things is also, if you've got someone to help you with assistance to get to the offices themselves, you could actually come into the offices and actually just drop in. We won't necessarily support you there and then, but we might get some details for you so we can contact you for another appointment. We also do home visiting, so we can come to you. But in terms of getting in touch with us, obviously, there's the building itself, the telephone, the email, send someone else in, get someone else to call up on your behalf as well. It's another thing. We're quite happy to take someone else to call.
I've got my husband, and he's not very good at finding numbers.
Okay. As I say, it could be even a neighbour or a friend, anyone else. It doesn't have to be you who contacts us in the first instance. We can take the call from anyone, and then we can make the return call.
What do I call?
Well, I've got the... I don't think I did put the number on here, did I? The helpline number, but that's something I'm going to supply through Jill.
We can circulate all the numbers and contact details in the newsletter.
What's the name of the organisation?
My organisation is called Action for Blind People, but you'd be calling initially the RNIB helpline.
Royal National Institute for the Blind.
Yeah, but I'm not blind. I'm not, I mean, I can't see, I can see, but it's how I see.
Yes.
It's distorted and blurred.
Yeah, we've agreed that we're not saying that they're exactly the same, but that there are some of the services which can be very beneficial for people with PCA. So I understand that.
You know, I need help with housing. I need someone to help me with housing. And I don't know where to go. I mean, my doctor's helped me by writing letters, but nobody comes, nobody...
Or maybe to try and help you with those individual problems after the meeting. Any other questions or queries people or comments people wanted to make? If not, one more.
People online talk a lot about voice dialers. There's supposed to be some very straightforward ones now. Voice dialers.
Voice dialers, do you know what it is?
You can attach between your phone and the telephone socket. You can do a study on that one. Or perhaps I can look into that after what we found earlier.
I've not heard of voice dialers, I have to say. It's not something I've come but maybe it's just something I just don't know. But, I was going to go back to about the armband thing. It's just, I know we kind of covered it already. It was just to say, again, I think with the high-vis jacket, it's a similar kind of thing, that an armband might be considered something like a security man's thing. And obviously there's the visual presentation as well. But it's just, as I said, I think the end result of the discussion the other day was being as visible as you can be. And the cane, as I say, in this group, people were discussing different types of canes. It was about being as visible as you can, and the cane